This is the OpenChain SBOM study group. It is a new study group in the OpenChain project. Kubota-san is chairing, and we are having a discussion that is open to everyone. Please feel free at any time to share your thoughts, ideas, suggestions, and concerns. This meeting, the same as all the meetings in the Linux Foundation, is held under our antitrust policy. You can find the full policy on the Linux Foundation website. If you're from a member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. If you're not from our community, you are very welcome to ask any questions of your own counsel. With that formality out of the way, I'm going to hand over to our chair in just a minute. I did notice a question from Umo over at Carl Zeiss, which just came in, which I'll just address as we get started with this meeting. And he referenced a webinar we just concluded a few minutes ago. He said in the webinar, there was a note that came in that Cyclone DX community is doing something around tracking patent information. Do any of us have a contact for that? I'd like to connect discussions because SPDX operations profile is also talking about that topic. Umo, at the moment, I don't have any contacts for you on that per se, but naturally that's something that I will find and I will share with you. I'm just going to give you
Great, thank you.
my genuine pleasure. I just put my email into the chat. So if you send me an email, I'll go and find the correct contacts so the SPDX operations profile people can talk with the Cyclone DX people working on the same topic.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Now, thank you for asking a question following up on a webinar we just had, but it's time to jump right into the study group we're about to have. And with that, I'll hand over to our chair and our host, Kubota-san, and all of the good friends like Ninjoji-san, Ito-san, who've spent so much time working on SBOMs in OpenChain. And I see we also have Mark Eton from Nokia, who has recently done some incredible work with his team on the same topic. Kubota-san, over to you.
Thank you, Shane. And I'd like to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Shane. Shane already introduced our activities, SBOM activities. So next, next topic is an overview of today. Ninjoji-san from Toshiba introduced this topic, overview of various regulations and guidelines, and what is needed for future discussions about SBOM. And after that, we would like to hold some discussions. And if there is another anything that needed to be discussed, we will have some time to discuss about that. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Ninjoji-san and hand over to the presentation to Ninjoji-san. Ninjoji-san, could you provide a presentation?
Sure. Please just wait a moment, and I'd like to share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Oh, so may I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Before to begin the start discussion, so hello everyone. My name is Takashi Ninjoji from Toshiba Corporation, and a member of the SBOM subgroup of OpenChain Project Japan Work Group. And actually, I'm one of the SPDX 3.0 Light Profiles contributor, but today I'm not talking about SPDX slides, more general matters. So from here, so I'm sorry, I cut off my camera, but I will continue my speech. Okay. So this time I'd like to share some of subgroups discussions, for example, overview of some regulations and guidelines mentioned about SBOM attributes or elements, and as well as rough comparison and a review of the recently published two documents. One is the CSA's Framing of Software Component Transparency Solution, and another one is BSI's guideline, how to pronounce it, TR 03183 Part 2, version 2.0.0. And from there, considerations for SBOM quality that the OpenChain project hopes to promote in the future, such as those in the light of the Take SBOM guide, I hope. Okay, so here we go. Sorry. Okay. And this slide shows some laws, regulations, and standards and guidelines related to SBOM. In 2021, in the United States, Executive Order 14028 was issued in the United States, and there has been a lot of activity in the areas of cybersecurity. In response to this, the NTIA has issued minimum elements for software bill of materials in the United States. The FDA has issued guidelines for medical devices. We will talk about, we will talk about CSA's documents later. There's a similar movement in Europe, and the CRA is currently holding off on publishing in the official gazette. We are aware that the European Commission has not yet issued any specific documents related to SBOM. However, the VSI, German agency in charge of information security, has issued 03182 Part 2, which serves as a guidelines. The latest version is 2.0.0, as I previously mentioned. Since the release of the first version last year, it has already been revised twice. In Japan, METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, has published the second version of the SBOM guidelines for Japanese enterprises. However, this is probably only a small part of what has already been published. In addition to these, there are also SBOM guidelines published in countries such as Netherlands, India, and China. And yes, OpenChain specification for process management, 5230 for license compliance, and 18974 for security assurance. These specification requires SBOM management, needs process management. And as many of you may already know, two data formats based on open source are international standards, SPDX, which is ISO IEC 5962, and CycloneDX, which is ECMA 424. And industry-driven activities and initiatives, for example, medical devices manufacturers and the payment card industry, data security standard, and automotive and telco. OpenChain Telco SBOM guide is element based on 50 to 60 ISO IEC 5962 and the later version as SPDX 2.3. This work is by Telco Working Group of the OpenChain project, which is an initiative of telecom industry companies like Ericsson and Nokia and other European companies. Also, it's intended for telecom industries, but it seems to be available for other industries. And in particular, if you look at the statement that refer to the requirements for SBOM contents, you can see that almost all refer to the NTIA minimum elements. A country, CISA is developing activities related to SBOM in the United States. CISA also released the Framing Software Component Transparency Solution this month. Let's take a brief look at the NTIA minimum elements and the SBOM attributes in CISA's document. CISA's Framing third edition is providing updates from practical perspectives, especially license compliance. CISA framing will not replace NTIA minimum elements. It's stated that CISA has the authority to revise the integer minimum elements, but it seems that the framing is not yet to replace integer minimum. In the integer minimum elements, hashes and the license information and the copyright information are recommended, but in the CSS framing, they are now required. And regarding dependency relationships, clarification has been made between the primary components and the component relationships. It means it's dependent components. Some people think that the minimum elements will be revised around 2025, but from the impression I got, it seems that the CSS framing will be something familiar from the perspective of license compliance practice in enterprise. Sorry. Now let's first take a look at how well. Sorry. Look at the guidelines and the new requirements and these new documents, some industry-specific requirements based on the presence of absence of or attributes in the SBOM. I apologize for the small text. However, the impression I got that it covers the integer minimum requirements without any problems. Let's pick up the attributes that are highly common with the integer minimum CSS baseline attributes and the BSI. I think it's a little bit easier to see now. Let's look at them from the top down. The first difference is SBOM type. We will see later, CSS doesn't necessarily require this, but the BSI, this means optional aspiration. But BSI mentions SBOM type, BSI doesn't seem the SBOM type, but there is no requirement for its management information. However, the technical SBOM guide address is this one. Create a comment to comply with this SBOM type. It can be said that IMDRF and FDA are characterized by requiring a support level of information. These ones, this one, and this one. This is something that CSS may be required depending on the use cases. And on the other hand, as well, I mentioned later, also BSI mentions end of life and other useful information, but I couldn't find any mention of requiring this information to be included in this SBOM. Currently, Telco SBOM guide doesn't clearly define the items that correspond to these support items. But by the way, my guess is that the PCI DSS and SSF is probably focused on the continuous operation of services. For that reason, it seems to be limited to the items that target vulnerability management in the service operation. Anyway, if SBOM complies with CISA or BSI, it will almost certainly meet the requirement of medical devices such as IMDRF and FDA, as well as PCI DSS SSF. On the items mentioned by CISA, the three below are not considered to be mandatory. But however, if the telco SBOM guide is to be used in a wider range of industries, there are examples of how they might be expressed in SPDX 2.2.1 or SPDX 2.3. This is my just personal opinion. For pedigree, you may need to consider adding the type of relationships you are for using. For example, relationships generated from or descendant of. And next system, the FDA's software level of support can be only used in some kind of comment field. Someone wants to write down in the document name or create a comment or document comment or package, but in some cases, so we should clearly define one comment field is better But finally, this one. The FDA end of support date and the immediate life cycle of a device or end of support date, the same comment field as before can be used for ISO 5962. And if we can use the SPDX 0.3, valid until date is also we can use it. I think that this matters will be the subject to discussion in the future tech working group and the SBOM study group, but I hope that it will be some of your interests. In the next page, there are attributes that only mentioned by BSI, SBOM URI, component file name, and executable or not, archive or not, structured or not, and the URI of source code and deployable component, and finally the associated licenses. Okay, so this is also a consideration of this in the same way as before. For both ISO 5962 and SPDX 2.3, a file name can be expressed using a package file name. Just to be sure, there is a statement in the second and final sentence of the section 3.2.1 component says that depending on the circumstances of the build, it's acceptable to omit the cryptographic hash or file name. However, I'm worried that it doesn't seem to be a description that says either one is always sufficient. Okay, and skip to the next one. And the associated license can be handled with a package license from files. However, this is something that lists all detected licenses. It's not required in the Teleco SBOM guide, as far as I know. It's not a topic now, but often discussed with. But it's not a topic often discussed with people from other companies, as far as I know. Now let's go back above. BSI requires information which component is executable or archived or structured or not. It seems that the package comment will work for this, but by the way, SPDX 2.3 introduces the primary package purpose. This was introduced by Cyclone DX first. But however, this property describes the type of the purpose, such as library or archive and so on. Therefore, it doesn't seem to express the status which BSI requires. So we will stop here with the presence of absence of attributes and the corresponding SBOM expressions. Okay, from here on, we will look at the comparison of the requirement of CSS document and the BSI's document. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at CSS maturity levels. As you may have noticed, it's a mixture of depths and breadths of dependencies and attributes levels. The first level, minimum expected, covers the primary component and its included components. The next level, recommended practice, covers the addition of attributes data and supplements component identification as well as practice for creating SBOM. And the last level is aspiration goal, considers dynamic and or remote dependencies. This color chip indicates whether there are any requirements for each level. And now I plot the color chips for the requirements in the CSS document. The SBOM type, as we have already seen earlier, that was mentioned earlier is only mentioned in aspiration. And there is a difference relationships and the license and the copyright notice and the unknown components and so on. We will leave the unknown related issues for another time, so we will skip them this time. So let's take a look other than the BSI requirements. As we've seen, CISA shows 3 maturity levels. On the other hand, BSI shows 5 categories as a level of details. We will look at them in this order. Let's get started. just this expression is not either document, but this relationship resolution. But let's call the depth and breadth of the categories of the dependencies and target components relationship resolution for now. And this differs between the two documents. SHISA's document requires information on the remote component at the aspiration goal, as we've seen earlier. On the other hand, the BSI doesn't mention the remote, but it does require information on the first component that is outside the scope of delivery. This is not a requirement in SISA. We will look at this later. And it's from type at least build SBOM. Sure. As I mentioned earlier, SISA only makes it optional for aspiration goals. And on the other hand, the BSI doesn't list SBOM type as a requirement. However, BSI seems to be based on build SBOM. This seems to be understandable given that the TR031H32 Part 2 is a guide for SBOM for preparing for CRA, and the kind of digital devices are the main target. So when comparing and considering CSA's document and BSI's document, it may be a good idea to assume the build SBOM. This is my personal opinion. I think we've got the back idea of the direction, but let's take a closer look at maturity levels and the level of details briefly. This is the lowest level. CISA minima expected covers primary component and direct dependencies. On the other hand, BSI top-level SBOM covers the primary component and all components which primary component directly depends on. So it seems to be a very similar definition. For the later discussions, I should briefly introduce this marks. What does it mean? The field circle are internal components, and the field square are external components. And internal component is one whose creator is different from the primary component. And yes, and the example for the external component, third-party components, is it. And the rectangle, just the framed rectangle, is just indicates the component is outside the scope of the delivery. And this gray cloud indicates the range of included into SBOM. And the next level is SHISA's recommended practices. This is supposed to include all components included in the distribution. It's just a distribution, and it's just a distribution. And BSI defines a level such as an N level and a transitive delivery item. N level is a step of depth from the primary component. So therefore, the top level SBOM we saw earlier is one level of SBOM. And the scope gradually expands. Transitive means that first external component is listed, and as we saw earlier, the delivery item SBOM lists the first component outside the delivery. The final level, the CISA's aspiration goal is to include as many dynamic and remote components as possible in SBOM. On the other hand, BSI's complete SBOM is to include all components that can be traced from the primary component. This includes components outside the scope of the delivery, as well as the full of the direct or transitive dependencies. Now I'd like to introduce something that caught my attention. Again, relationship resolution. SHISA's application wants remote and no levels mentioned outside scope of delivery. On the other hand, BSI, in the BSI documents, no mention about remote, but needs the first component that is outside the scope of delivery. My impression is it's necessary to give sufficient consideration to whether the CSS maturity level and the BSI's level of detail clarify our transaction requirements and regulatory requirements as well. And the second topic is license. It seems that the scope of the components covered the license information will expanding according to maturity level. But there is one thing in the description about aspiration goal. This is the first time that refer to concluded license. Does this mean that it's okay if minimum expected or recommended practice should at least cover the declared license? I'm not sure. But on the other hand, BSI requires required associated license, and additional concluded license, and optional declared license. The order of priority for declared and concluded license doesn't match between both documents. But as we can see in the telecom guide, both type concluded and declared information are required for license compliance. So this difference is unlikely to cause any problems. But however, the fact that BSI requires associated license is an incremental change. I'm curious to know how many companies are careful to include this kind of license information in their SBOM. Okay, the next one is the hash algorithm. There seems to be a difference even with the hash algorithm. SHISA specifies SHA 256 or higher. By the way, but on the other hand, the BSI specifies 512. So it's a difference. And this is going to need to use the SBOM and the CSACBX for cybersecurity. Here there is a debate about whether SBOM and CSACBX should be used same data file or separate files. CycleDX has introduced vulnerabilities model which can express BEX. Also, SPDX 3.0 can also express BEX with security profile. From this, it's technically possible to express SBOM and BEX in the same JSON or JSON LD file in each data format. However, the question is whether or not it's necessary to combine the contents with the distributed with additional signature and have different update functions into one data file. There appears to be a difference in nuance between SHISA and BSI document, but there is a description like this. In SHISA's document, says nor expected to be included in the SBOM itself. While BSI says not contain. Furthermore, it stated that it is required not to include vulnerability information in an SBOM, even though an SBOM format specification supports that. From this point of view, it seems that the direction is to operate them separately. By the way, as a side note, at the same time as BSI TR 03182 Part 2, Part 3 version 0.0.9.0 was also released as a guide for vulnerability management. This document mentioned CSAF as a data format. And CIS has already published minimum requirements for BEX. In addition, OpenBEX is being implemented in OpenSSF compared to CSAF. It seems OpenBEX is a lighter structure and description. So it will be interesting to see how OpenBEX will develop and matures and how to use the CSAF or OpenBEX or both. This is my curiosity. And this is the last thing we are going to introduce today. End of X. In CISA's document, it's supplemental information to support use cases. The example seems to be required by MDRF and the FDA that we've already seen earlier. On the other hand, in BSI document, it says the version number. Version number should reflect the minimum required version. Sorry, I'm not highlighted. But it makes easy to know the skip version, the end of life or security vulnerabilities. So, however, there is no requirement to clarify clearly to indicate information such as end of life date also. We've looked at a lot of things, but I've only got one more thing to say. When it comes to risk management in the software supply chain, it seems important to carefully consider stakeholders, what kind of information is handled, and how it's shared. It seems that we need to be aware of the flow of information in B2B. Sorry, I'm not illustrated, but B2C, and also and the regulatory authorities. This is the final slide. I hope we can have various discussion with everyone in the community. CISA's maturity level are mixture of depth and broadness of dependency and information richness. So SBOM quality is likely to be a mosaic. Is it okay? And in the sense of the difference between CISA's document and BSI's document, how to handle maturity level versus level of details, and what level with attribute is adequate for every stakeholders in the software supply chain, and how to express the SBOM document, both SBDX and CycloneDX. Also, it's not mentioned here that I'm also interested in automating the management of SBOMs and vulnerabilities across the software development lifecycle. Thank you so much for your listening. My presentation is finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Niju-san. And as the last slide, Niju-san mentioned, are there any comments or discussion questions?
I see quite a lot of comments in the chat. It's been very exciting over there. So there's so many comments here that I think it might be useful, if it's okay, to ask people to speak to their ideas and notes. Anthony, I noticed you had quite a lot to say. I was wondering if you'd like to summarize some of the key points that you found interesting, you think that should be looked at next.
I think it's very useful to see the comparison of all these different guidelines. I wish there was a single one, personally, because it's going to make, software's global, and I would really like everyone to harmonize on one set. It might be a low level initially, but we're still in the crawling stage of SBOMs, and I would like us to get the quality of SBOMs, simple SBOMs, sorted out first before we get too detailed and making them better. Having said that, I think the use of the different types of SBOMs, I think, is really important. You can't just say an SBOM when there's 6 different types of SBOMs. I think it's really important you think about who's going to use your SBOM, because as you go through the life cycle, you get more and more information. So if I'm in a production environment, I want to know the versions of the components that are running in production, and that's not going to be available at a source SBOM because I don't know the dynamic linkage of the components. So I think you really need to be very careful when you ask for an SBOM. You need to be more precise. So it's great, the discussion about SBOM type, and I think that's an evolving discussion within the community. So I see a lot just at source SBOMs. That doesn't give me enough information when I want to do vulnerability risk management. So I think that's a really important point that I think was well articulated in the discussion. Personally, I think we have a lot to get to because the tooling isn't quite there yet. The second point is I think we also need to think about the vulnerabilities and SBOMs. SBOMs are static. Vulnerabilities are very dynamic. I wouldn't want to be updating my SBOM every time a new vulnerability comes up or a new assessment comes up. So I'm very an advocate of keeping SBOMs static and having a more dynamic VEX format. I know there's a different opinions. I know Thomas came up with a comment challenging me. But from a personal perspective, I think it's going to be far easier to say, I have product, and this is the version of the SBOM. There's separate life cycle for vulnerabilities. So I think they need to be kept separate. So I agree with what was being recommended by the BSI in that, and I would, I would support that. So there's a lot there.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to hear the thoughts from the Thomas, who is one contributor to the SPDF 3.0 security profile. Thomas, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Yeah, there was a whole discussion since I worked on the 3.0 security profile, whether to include VEX or not. And I think the fundamental question is actually there's two streams of thoughts. So one is there an SBOM is a static document that you ship over, like it's a physical, think of it as a Word document or a quality assurance document that you ship with a product. And the other one, train of thought, is that the SBOM is more an API stream. So basically, the suppliers and the consumers are part of a continuous network communication. And then the question comes, the SBOM is not necessarily the document, but the SBOM is kind of, in that you see in 3.0, is kind of a container where you can link multiple informations together. And so these are the two thoughts why in SPX 3.0 you see that basically the both scenarios are supported. So one is a scenario where basically what I believe for the document SBOM, right? The right way is to, in your SBOM, when you publish it, have some kind of link pointing from like, here is my VEX information. So I strongly pros of just like Anthony to include VEXes in document SBOMs that are like static and can be downloadable like JSON file or XML files, but you should link to where your VEXes can be found, and that can be a VEX API or another system where you can find VEXes. But the other case is where you have kind of like SBOM streams, so there's a continuous communication where what most people don't, the standard use case is still you have an SBOM document, but you can also make an SBOMs of SBOMs where you use the SBOM format to link things together. And then it makes sense to links VEX things together, because then you can just basically communicate via the same SBOM techniques, you can communicate VEX changes as well. But I think this is the problem, that most people don't understand the different way or different use cases. But this has to do that some of the organizations that we worked with use the SBOM standards to internally communicate between streams of data that are continuously flowing. But between organizations, we have like external organizations, we haven't seen that yet. But that may be why there's a lot of confusion between VEX inside SBOM, not inside SBOM. I think they should be separated, but if there is an API use case, they might come together. I hope this helps.
Thank you. John, do you have any comment? Or some other people?
I just
Have
noted
any
that
comment?
Yari had a few comments earlier. Yari, might you want to speak to some
Okay.
of those?
Well, I guess I'm just repeating what Thomas was just saying, that there might be good use cases when the vulnerability information or the VEX information is dynamic, within the SBOM, but on the other hand, at least for today, I'm in the static SBOM and dynamic vulnerability or VEX camp. But let's see, we are still in early days, so how the industry will form. I think we will see that, and well, maybe we are the ones who are forming the industry as well. So let's take a stand here, maybe.
Okay, thank you. And here, can I share one slide about related to this topic? Ninja-san, can I share my screen?
You should be able to share it. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, recently, Japan SBOM subgroup discussed about what should be needed to future discussion. And related previous topics. It is dependent, SBOM and VEX depends on the context and receiving timing and distributing timing. And we think when receiving timing, we should discuss maturity level of upstream entity. This is very important. And of course, security perspective and license compliance perspective, what information we need is different. So this R1 from R1 to R3 should be discussed in the future. And some parts have already discussed in many SBOM subgroups. And then what information do we manage inside our company? That's a security perspective and the license perspective. And the big difference is distributing timing. When we ship the product or software, usage of the software is different by downstream companies. So in this use case, specific use case, we need to discuss about what information is needed to the downstream company, downstream entities. And a security perspective, what information do they, company, customer needed? On the other hand, license compliance perspective, what information must we provide? Then this is a license compliance perspective. So I illustrated, change the color, maturity level of upstream entity, and the different usage of software by downstream entity, and the license compliance perspective. This 3 points is needed to be categorized, and what information is needed. We list these from this perspective is important, I think. What is are there any comments or question? Comment?
I think it would be interesting to look at what an end user needs, as I think from another company, because I think the software supply chain, in the upstream and downstream are probably very similar. But actually, what does an end user really value? Is he really bothered about the license as much as security? It would be interesting. If I'm an end user, I'm more concerned about, am I vulnerable? The license information is probably the risk, maybe not as great as the security risk.
Yes, I agree. But CRA requires us, for example, CRA requires us to provide the SBOM and VEX. When we, for example, we ship the headphone, CRA requires us to provide the SBOM. But end user customers, when end user customers receives a bunch of SBOM, they don't. I think they don't want to receive such bunch of SBOM JSON files. On the other hand, some companies buy the routers from the upstream company and connect their network and manage their IT infrastructure. It is needed to be provided detailed information such as SBOM and including backs and so on. This depends on the context or usage of the downstream entities. So we needed to, I think, it's my opinion, but we should separate this information from the use case. What do
I
you
think, yeah, I think, and this is for debate as well. I am not an advocate of having different SBOMs for different end users. So, say a regulator only gets a subset of an SBOM that you may pass to another software organization. I am of view that you provide the same SBOM to multiple users. How that user consumes the SBOM will depend on his use case. So it might be if it's a compliance team, they're probably only going to be interested in the license information. If it's the security team, they're going to be interested in the versions of the components, maybe. So that would be an interesting view in terms of whether people think we should have different viewpoints of an SBOM or not. Now, but I think we probably need more end users of SBOMs to be involved. What do they value? I know looking on the group, we've probably got various organizations who are providing product, but how do we have an end user, let's say a government, how they would interpret, what do they value within the SBOM? Now that would be a really interesting discussion.
Jimmy, do you have any opinion? Can you share your opinion?
I can certainly try at least. So I don't see that there needs to be a sort of either or. I think that in an ideal scenario, one SBOM can sort of both provide for license compliance information as needed or license information as needed, and the necessary information needed for security. And just as a reply to Anthony, I'm probably myself more concerned with licensing as an end user than I am security. But that doesn't mean that security is not important or that there aren't people within my company that would certainly be more interested and more concerned with security aspects. But I neither do I want to see sort of multiple SBOMs depending on the persona. I would much rather prefer one SBOM containing all the necessary information for the various use cases and various end user personas that will consume that. And I would also to stress that, and that was one of the points of the telco SBOM, is really that we don't want to cater to necessarily multiple customers or multiple sort of receivers of these SBOMs with their specific requirements. So instead, having one SBOM for that sector or for that kind of customer, and the same then for people supplying in that value chain to simplify things.
Thank you. Okay, and next comment is Stefan. Can you share your thought?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just very interested by the diagram here, and I just wondered if there was a use case that people could envisage where a downstream company might actually require a dynamic SBOM, because somehow the delivery was quite closely integrated with the architecture upstream that would require a dynamic SBOM service, as you described. Someone else, I think, described like an API stream. Are there any kind of use cases that come to mind as to that would really suggest that was needed?
Sorry, I don't have the proper answer. Are there any thoughts? Anyone? Does anyone have any thoughts?
I mean, it probably depends on how the use of SBOM will continue in the future. I think this is kind of what we had as a discussion earlier with the security assessment, where I agree with Thomas and where the discussion was going earlier, that you don't want this too dynamic in the SBOM. But where I see a use case is that you might want assessments in there. And this is something that we also discuss now for operations use, where you might want to include export control information in the SBOM, or at least link it to the SBOM. I think there's still no final say how to really do this. But this is an area, this is from my point of view, very new, that in the past you were dealing with open source licenses where you would expect there wouldn't be much change over time. But of course, with vulnerabilities and also something like export control assessments, this might change in the future. So you would just put probably something like a timestamp on that information and say, okay, this was the assessment at that time. Then I see use cases there that you will have these discussions in, I don't know, customer intake control, when you're supplying to other businesses, that they want to see this in contract negotiations, that, okay, at that point in time when we agree on the contract, there was this assessment and this is now the risk attached to this. And then, of course, you would need to come up with a way to supply this information dynamically, but I don't see this in larger cycles. Then it's probably relevant for the actual VEX information, which you would use daily. And this is then more kind of a topic for the technical departments, whereas something like export control might change over time. And there you might see some kind of dynamic in these SBOMs, but with longer cycles in between, maybe yearly update on the assessment or something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. And Alin, you raised a hand.
Yeah, thank you, Kubota-san. In my opinion, we will see something in between, because the companies have to pay to generate SBOM, so that is a cost for them, and they will do the minimum requirements by law. So I personally think that we will have a mix between dynamic and static.
Yes, exactly. I think this is very dependent on the actual use case and agreement between companies, how they set up their contracts, what information should be provided and is consumed, or if you're responsible on your own to generate it.
Thank you very much. Okay, less than 7 minutes. So are there any thoughts or comments?
Hello, yes, so thank you for the very good comparison between different documents. That is quite useful. So my question was, now we have these many documents, so what do we want to achieve? Should we produce a document recommending how to adhere to this different standards, and how do we proceed to create it?
Thank you. Nidori-san, do you have any comment on this?
From me, from my side.
Yes.
I have also same question to this community. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, are there any comments?
Question. So we're discussing on the SBOM study groups to treat the issues just Market and pointed out, or other aspects we will more prioritized issues for the SBOM promotion, or how to make more enhanced SBOM quality or more automated initiatives also. I'm not sure, but what is important and how to reach the information sharing in the software supply chain.
Does anyone have any thoughts?
Ito-san has his hand up.
Here, as Koboto-san mentioned, I think there already exist the several purposes of SBOM already discussed in many places. One in the some sort of national security and customer protection, and especially in Japan, SBOM mentioned in the sentence of the industrial promotion. For example, SBOM, utilizing SBOM in export control, mentioned in this meeting, that's related in some aspects in the industrial promotion and national security. So there are several target of SBOM already exist, and perhaps we have a lot more methodology required to fulfill those requirements. Perhaps more requirement, more target of the SBOM might be promoted in future. So perhaps we have to check the many response on each industry, each public sector, and many correspond people. Perhaps it might be improve more members in the world. But Ninja-san and Koboto-san concluded today's document, and after it's quite useful to start the discussion about those how we treat the SBOM for each entity of SBOM supplier to in the industrial supply chain, I think.
Thank you, Ito-san. Thank you. Very good discussion. But we will have only 2 minutes, so I think can we close this meeting?
Yes.
And, yeah.
No choice.
Yes.
A fantastic meeting. So much covered. That's really wonderful. Thank you very much for hosting, Koboto-san, and thank you everyone for everyone who contributed.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to seeing some people in next week at the Open Source Summit Japan and Open Conference as well. Thank you for attending today. We will close this meeting. Have a good day.
Thank you, Koboto-san. Take care, all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you.